Firstly, I would like to thank WYMEC
Recording in progress.
for giving me this opportunity. On behalf of the Women and Young Member Excellence Committee of ICAI, I extend a warm welcome to the 78th Sky High Symposium. Sky High Symposium series is a platform created by the committee to share technical updates and enhance non-technical skills, as well as encourage members to confidently express themselves on public forums. The initiative aims to empower our members to step forward and make the most of their ability. The chairperson of WYMEC is CA Preeti Savla ma'am. She is also the chairperson of Sustainability Reporting Standard Board and Valuation Standard Board for the year 2023-24. Our vice president for WYMEC is CA Abhay Chachar sir. He is not only the chairperson of Commercial Law, Economic Advisory, and NPO Cooperative, but also the vice chairperson of Accounting Standard Board. Sky High Symposium series is a Wednesday program which is thoughtfully designed to nurture the growth and development of women and young members. Sky High Symposium is not only a platform for technical updates, but also a platform to cultivate and empower non technical skills and empower members to shine confidently on public stage. Today's session is divided into two parts. The first part will be taken on basis of BRSR, which will be taken by CA Disha Veera, and the other session will be taken on recent rulings on transfer pricing, which will be taken by CA Shazia Khatri. With this, I welcome both our speakers, all our coordinators, the team, and participants to the 78th Sky High Symposium. I would request the participants to kindly put up their questions in the chat box, which will be taken up later. Now, let me introduce to you all our speaker for the first session, CA Disha Agarwal. CA Disha Veera. Disha is a chartered accountant and an alumnus of NM College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai. She has cleared all levels of CFA program. Disha comes with a rich experience of 5 years in consultancy and investment banking. She started her career as a trainee in KNAV Corporate Finance and went to co lead a team of 10 others. She has worked and advised numerous clients on business planning, growth strategy, corporate finance, and fundraising. She has an exposure to industries spanning in fintech, fashion, media entertainment, and so on. She now runs her own consultancy that provides services relating to sustainability reporting and strategy to clients. She also assists non-profit organizations in reporting and maximize their impact. So that's a brief introduction about our first speaker, Madam, CA Disha Veera. I would request Disha to take over. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words, Zeel. I'll just share my screen. I hope it's visible to everyone. Okay. So, a very good afternoon to one and all present here. Today's topic is on basics of business responsibility and sustainability report, the BRSR report. I would like to start the session with the very problem in our midst, and that's the ESG conundrum. I'll just read the problem statement here. A small ATM room having 2 ACs and 4 tube lights working 24 hours is asking me to not print a receipt to save the environment. It might sound very funny, but at the same time, it's very thought provoking. This was the situation of sustainable reporting for years and years. And by default, the stakeholders and government worldwide are wary of companies making very boilerplate comments or just disclosing things that are good while they are just hiding the other side of the coin, right? So that was one of the reasons why something like BRSR came into the picture. So the session today shall be divided into 3 parts. I've kept it very simple. We shall answer 3 questions: why, what, and how. First is, why was BRSR necessary? What is BRSR? What are the disclosures required? And how are companies implementing BRSR in their annual reporting? So the last two questions, I'll try and take them up together, but this is largely the flow. We're trying to follow the golden circle by Simon Sinek, if any of you will have actually read about it. That's how the session is structured. So first, why BRSR? 90% of the global institutional investors consider ESG issues when they are making investments. This includes the top 10 large companies which contribute to like maximum of the assets under management today. There are numerous funds owned by mutual funds, private equity, which have a very large allocation to ESG compliant companies. In fact, there are fund indices like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, like the FTSE 4 the MSCI, the Morgan Stanley Index. All of these have specific allocations to companies that are ESG compliant. It could mean that those companies are using or creating products that are sustainable or are compliant with the relevant ESG disclosures required. So, of course, looking at this, where India receives majority of the FDI money, and we know how sensitive our stock market is to institutional funds, this was something imperative for SEBI to introduce. Another example in the Indian context, let's look at SBI and Amundi. Amundi Investment is one of the top 10 institutional investors across the world. It had invested in SBI's green bonds. Now, SBI was considering giving a loan to Adani of 500 crores to build a coal mine in Australia. Now, this was just under consideration. The moment Amundi's sustainability team got to know about this, they made a statement that they would divest from SBI's fund if SBI granted a loan to Adani for this purpose. Now, understand the ramification. One of the top 10 institutional investors in the world would divest from your business. It's not just a matter of financial interest, but also of reputational interest. Uh, so later on, of course, SBI decided to not go ahead with the proposal, but this is one of the major examples of how important ESG considerations are in investor decision making today. Another example that I would like to take to emphasize this point is ExxonMobil and Engine Number One. For those who don't have context, Engine Number One is an impact investing fund which follows the strategy of shareholder activism. What is shareholder activism? Basically, the shareholders take an active interest in the management of the business by introducing resolutions to bring about reforms in the business. So, Engine Number One is one such fund that invests in business. ExxonMobil is one of the leading producers of oil and natural gas in the world. And at the time of investment, it was slightly in a distressed condition. So when Engine Number One invested, it had only about 0.02% stake in the company. And it managed to get about 3 board seats in the company. Now, this concept is really unheard of. An investor having just 0.02% stake getting 3 board seats. On what basis, right? So, Engine Number One was able to lobby with large shareholders to lobby their climate related interests. They had some climate reforms in mind, ESG related points, including financial matters that ExxonMobil could actually work on. So these were some of the points that they rallied to some of the largest shareholders, and on the basis of which they were appointed the directors of the company. So this is another example of how very important ESG disclosures are to investors today. The second important reason is that in the long run, ESG creates value for the business. Now, this is something that a lot of people, even in general, contest that ESG is just like a cost center for everyone. What is the benefit out of it? It's just like a tick in the box exercise. But over the long run, it has been seen that ESG's policies, if actually implemented by the company, help in creating value. To give you an example, GM, which is a very large conglomerate, had replaced all its trucks, four-wheeler, six-wheeler, eight-wheeler vehicles from fuel-based to electric-based. And this largely reduced its cost arising from fuel. Similarly, this was just an example of how cost reduction could happen by implementing ESG. If we take Unilever's Sunlight soap example here, Sunlight soap was one of the first soap bars ever introduced in the world. So it was introduced as early as in the 1800s, when people did not have any commercial bars which were being sold and bought. This was one of the first soap bars which was ever introduced. And later on, Unilever bought the rights and it introduced a liquid format of this soap. In one of its initiative, it sort of introduced a product which required less water to clean. Now, after the launch, the product saw 20% more growth than all its peers in that category. And this was especially in water scarce countries, a lot of African countries, even in Asian continent. So this actually contributed to a great revenue revival for the company. Another example that I could take is probably for survey that was done by London Business School's alumni, where they found out that over a span of 25 years, the companies that were amongst the top 100 ranked as some of the best companies to work with. That's a Fortune list that's released every year. So this was done for a period of 25 years. Those companies earned 2 to 4% more stock returns than any of its peers. So it shows that companies that have been consistently following ESG parameters have actually had superior financial results as compared to any of their peers. And if I talk about the long term, there is one name that always comes up when we talk about integrity, when we talk about reputation. That's the Tata Group. So Jamshedji Tata, you can see his photo on the screen here. He was one of the first persons to introduce Provident Fund in India back in 1901, when this concept was completely unheard of. In fact, there was no Provident Ordinance or Provident Act also at that time, but their mills offered Provident Fund schemes to their workers, laborers on a regular basis. Now, that culture has sort of carried on even today. A lot of Tata companies, including TCS, witness a lot lesser attrition rates than a lot of their peers. And the reputation that they've created is, I think, unparalleled. So, this is another benefit that business sort of get from ESG reporting. And last 2 points before we conclude on the why of BRSR. A lot of shareholders are now submitting grievance or resolutions, shareholder resolutions, to promote or to stop any proposals which conflict with environment, social, or good governance practices. So, the example that I would like to take here is of the BP Group. It's again one of the largest oil and gas producing companies in the world. And in 2020, the company had decided to reduce its oil and gas production by 40% between 2022 and 2030. But what happened is in subsequent years, that is in 21, the oil prices rose. And it was greatly beneficial for the company. And as a result of which, even the management's compensation, which is generally linked to the performance of the company, was also great. So the management also got paid in good big checks. And the same year, the company decided to reduce its target from 40% to 20 to 30% because the business was doing profitable. This was a profit-making segment. Now, this was completely against their original target and also not good for the environment. So, Follow This Group, which is also a shareholder, they sort of raised a resolution to stick to the original target and provide a plan of how the company was looking at meeting the Paris Agreement expectations, which is to restrict global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial levels. Now, this was something that the company was strongly against. Surprisingly, this resolution got about 16 to 20% positive consent from the shareholders. Though this was not majority, but it was far greater than what other climate resolution had got in the past. So subsequently, it was obviously rejected. But this stands as a very big testament that the shareholders are not going to be quiet now. If the company makes commitments, it has to stick to it. And if it doesn't have any commitments, it's time that it looks at ESG more seriously. And last and not the least, BRSR is after all a law. It abides by India's overall vision, and India is an endorser and a subscriber to many agreements and treaties. The UNGP, that is the United Nations Guiding Principles, which provide a lot of guidelines on business responsibility and human rights. UN SDGs, there are 17 SDGs that are mandated for all UN members who signed. Paris Agreement, again, restricting global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. And the ILO, International Labour Organization, which speaks loud and clear about human rights, especially for laborers. So all these agreements just signed would not mean anything till the time they are not executed. So BRSR was a great way for the government to institutionalize, to make this mandatory for at least some of the biggest companies in India, right? So coming to the history of how BRSR actually came into existence, in 2008, the first national voluntary guidelines were issued by the MCA. It laid some of the most very basic foundation for what we see today as BRSR. In 2012, something called as BRR. I'm sure a lot of professionals who have joined would also know that what BRR is, might have also practiced there. So it was mandatory first for top 100 listed companies. When we say top 100, it means by market capitalization. It had far lesser details and did not cover all aspects of ESG back then. In 2015, it was extended to top 500 listed companies. In 2017, the SEBI Institute circulated that IR, that is integrated reporting, is voluntary now for top 500 companies. Now, what is integrated reporting, right? It is a framework that is developed by the Integrated Reporting Council. That's an international organization. It provides that a company needs to disclose non-financial information also along with financial information, right? So it has propagated different types of capital apart from financial capital. Let's say human capital, there's nature capital, such kind of other non-financial parameters for companies to track. So this was introduced by SEBI as a guideline for voluntary adoption. It was not mandatory. And this was for the same companies that had to report for BRR. So it was sort of an integrated framework that they could follow. In 2019, the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct were released, called the NGRBC. This was one of the milestones of what we see as BRSR today, because it introduced the 9 principles, the core 9 principles, on the basis of which BRSR is formed today. So the core elements and the core ideas behind each of these principles was actually elaborated here in the NGRBC. In the meanwhile, in the same year, BRR was extended to top 1,000 listed companies. And in 2021, finally, the BRSR was introduced for the top 1,000 listed companies. Now, this was after recommendations from a committee that SEBI had formed. It was first introduced in 2021-22 on a voluntary basis. And in FY 22-23, it was made mandatory for the top 1,000 listed companies. So last financial year was actually the first year when companies reported BRSR on a mandatory basis. Now, from now on, of course, it is mandatory. So coming to the what of BRSR now, what are the kind of disclosures that are required under BRSR? We'll just jump into that now. There are 3 parts of the BRSR. One is Section A, general disclosures. Section B, management and process disclosures. And Section C, principle-wise performance disclosures. What you see on the right-hand side, the Qs, those are the questions which are included in each of these sections. So general disclosures has 24 questions, and similarly for all other sections. Now, talking about general disclosures, it first talks about some very basic details of the company, like corporate entity, what is the SIN, what are the products and services offered, operations, which markets does the company operate in, how many employees does the company have, segregation by male, female, segregation by permanent, non-permanent, segregation by designation, key managerial person, board of directors, and other employees. Number of related parties, a list of related parties, their association, whether it's a subsidiary or not, whether the company is required to invest in CSR projects, what are the grievance redressal mechanisms that a company has placed. These are very standard disclosures. There are two disclosures that I would specifically focus on here. One is standalone or consolidated entities. Now, BRSR provides an option to companies to disclose either on a standalone basis or on a consolidated basis. A lot of international frameworks require that information should be disclosed for the same entity as the related financial disclosures. So let's say if a company has disclosed on a consolidated basis its financial disclosures, then it would have to disclose all sustainability information also on a consolidated basis. But that's not the case with BRSR. BRSR provides that option to the companies to do it either on a standalone basis or on a consolidated basis. To give you an example, Reliance, that is the number one company by market cap, does it on a standalone basis. TCS, which is number two by market cap, does it on a consolidated basis. Reliance has about 270 related parties, which are all from different industries. So it is very difficult to report on a consolidated basis. But TCS, which has only 52 related entities, are all mostly of the same nature. It's easier for it to disclose on a consolidated basis. I hope that's clear. In case you all have any questions, you all can put it in the comment section. I can address it towards the end. On the second point, that is material responsible business conduct issues. Now, you would be wondering that ESG is such a broad thing, right? If I just talk about environment, there is so much under environment that one has to report. For example, you talk about water, you talk about air pollution, you can talk about energy consumption, you can talk about waste management, you can talk about biodiversity. There's so much that you can talk about and lot of subsections. But what is material to one company may not be material to the other company, right? A service-based company might just waste a lot of time if it reports on biodiversity, right? Because it might have a minimal impact compared to other, let's say, manufacturing units, right? So it might have to focus on other things. So in this case, the company has to identify what is material to them. And for that, we can do something like materiality assessment. Now, there is not much guidance given by SEBI, but a lot of other international frameworks like the GRI, etc., provide a lot of background on how companies can recognize what is material. So we'll just look at the definition here. It's a method to assess ESG-related risks and opportunities that are most critical, not just to the business, but also to its stakeholders. So two important points in this definition. One is it looks at both risk and opportunities. Second, it's not just what's critical to the business, but what is also critical to the stakeholders. So you might feel that, let's say the entity, generally the businesses feel everything relating to profitability is a little more important. But for stakeholders, there might be a lot of other points which are important. So the intersection of the two is what has to be considered. So I have sort of taken a screenshot of Ultratech's materiality metrics. So it had conducted a survey and it found out what was relevant to its stakeholders and what is relevant to the business. And the quadrant that you see on the right-hand side, the first quadrant, is where both the stakeholders and the business consider to be highly material or highly important. That's climate change, health and safety, transparency, water management, sustainable products, etc. Right? I would also like to take you all through the detailed materiality assessment that the company did. Yes. So after the materiality matrix was presented, I hope you all can see, yes. After this was presented, the material points were all divided into three parts: environment, social, and governance. So like you can see, the same points are now classified as high, medium, and low, but in three categories. They're also mapped against different types of capitals here on the right-hand side. These are according to the integrated reporting framework that the company follows. And you can also see it's mapped to the SDGs, that is the UN Sustainable Development Goals here. So that's how these material points have been classified. After that, the company has gone ahead and explained why the most critical points, what is their business impact, how are they leveraging or how are they mitigating? If it's a risk, they are mitigating. If it's an opportunity, they are leveraging. and what is their strategy. A lot of people say that ESG actually starts with G, because if the governance is right, it can hold on to environment and social issues. It can always work on that. So that's how important it is to sort of have inculcate these things into your strategy or governance practices. So that actually flows from the top. So let's take an example of circular economy here. They first talk about the business impact. We believe that embracing circular economy has the potential to enhance our overall margins by reducing fuel and material costs. Okay, so that's what they feel, it's an opportunity for them. How do they do it? So they have a fourfold opportunity for our for their. They say that they have a fourfold opportunity for our company in the cement industry. Firstly, by utilizing waste and byproducts from other industries as alternate fuel and raw materials, we can reduce our dependence on new renewable resources. This shift towards an alternate material helps us reduce our carbon footprint. Thirdly, these waste materials are available at low cost compared to conventional materials. And finally, by actively supporting other industries and local urban bodies in implementing solid waste management, we enhance our brand image and reputation. So that's how the company thinks that they can benefit from this. How are they implementing it in their strategy? We are making active investments in waste pre-processing and co-processing infrastructure supported by state-of-the-art R&D laboratories to strengthen our capacity for circular economy. We actively use industrial waste such as slag, gypsum for incorporating alternative fuels like municipal solid waste, industrial waste, etc. And it has later gone ahead and also set targets for itself. So here the target is maximize the usage of industrial and other waste. This might seem a little broad to you, but for other such key material items, let's say the one beside it, health and safety, they have a target of zero fatality by 2024. So that's more specific. This one is slightly broad, but they have tracked their progress against it by saying substitution of 20.6% conventional raw material through recycled and alternative raw material, substitution of 5.2% thermal energy from fossil based fuel through alternate fuel resources. So, this way, they've also tracked their performance against their goals and targets that they had set before. So, this was a great example. I've seen a lot of annual reports lately, but this was one of the best when it came to materiality assessment, and hence I thought we should just discuss that here. Going back to our section B, now that we're done with section A, section B focuses more on management and other process disclosures. So here there are 9 principles that makes up the BRSR. We shall discuss them, but briefly for you all to know, it is larger categories on which disclosures are made, like human rights, employees, consumers, stakeholder interests, etc. So, as such, are 9 principles. So, the company has to disclose whether it has a policy relating to these 9 principles or not, and provide reasons if it does not have one. Right. Then it has to disclose standards and certifications adopted. What all can be included here? There are different standards globally that a lot of Indian companies also follow, like Global Reporting Initiative, TCFT, Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures. This was introduced by the FSB, that is the Financial Stability Board. It also includes certifications like ISO certifications on health and safety, on environmental assessment, etc. So that is also to be disclosed if the company has adopted. It does not make it mandatory, but the company has to disclose. What happens is, a lot of times, if the company says no, it has to provide reasons. And those reasons are very specific. For example, when the entity does not provide any policy for any of those 9 principles, there is an option to select whether you did not disclose because you did not have the knowledge, or because you did not have the resources, were you financially constrained, or were there any other reasons. Please disclose those reasons. So here it is actually comply or explain, where if you do not comply, you actually have to explain why you did not comply, right? Another point is performance against goals and targets. We actually just saw certain goals and targets, but I want to show you another example of Tech Mahindra, of how they disclose their goals and targets. The picture that you see on the right hand side are their broad goals. What kind of goals do companies set in ESG? Let's have a look. So reach carbon neutrality by 2030, become net zero by 2035, 100% owned facilities to be zero waste to landfill certified by 2025. And there are others. So these are broad strategies or targets that a company sets. Now let us look at how the company discloses performance against these targets. So Tech Mahindra actually did it very well. I'll just bring up my screen. Yes. So Tech Mahindra divided its ESG targets into four parts actually: business imperatives, people imperatives, environmental imperatives, and governance imperatives. And within that, it identified certain areas which could lead to the achievement of its broader targets. So let's say if we talk about business imperatives, it had innovation contests and events, innovation revenue, ideas incubated, customers connected, CSAT index, that is the customer satisfaction index. It created a base year, that is 2021 was their base year. Then they had a target year, of course, by when would you want to achieve your target. So target year for them for these imperatives was 25-26. And now they are tracking progress for every year in the middle. So, as a shareholder, as an investor, or as any other stakeholders looking at this report, you can actually see okay, this was their target, this was where they were before, and this is their progress. So, this is a level of granularity that companies have actually gone into while disclosing on a lot of sustainability points. This might be slightly a new one for you, but like when we look at people section, these are points which we look at news articles, we look in the news articles, but don't realize that companies are actually disclosing this. Total women employees, women in senior management, what is their attrition, how many HR assessments were conducted, uh, TMF is the data, Tech Mahindra Foundation, how many smart centers, academies for their employees, etc. were made. So all of this is actually disclosed in their BRSR reports. And this one was really interesting. Amongst a lot of others, I felt that Tech Mahindra was doing a great job by disclosing this. So coming back to section B, the next disclosure is leadership. Leadership actually focused on the people who are responsible at the end in the governance structure for ESG implementation. Independent evaluation of policies, that is whether an auditor had actually assured the policies that the company has. Now coming to section C. Before that, I'll just take a small 30-second break. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So coming to section C, that is principle-wise performance disclosures. So this is where now we discuss the 9 core principles that define BRSR. These 9 core principles are divided into 2 parts: essential indicators and leadership indicators. Essential indicators are ones which require mandatory disclosure. There are about 62 questions here. We shall just briefly go through it, and the ones which are more important, the one which we need to see examples for, we shall stress on that. And then there are leadership indicators, which are optional and voluntary for the company. It was seen that in the first year, roughly about 50% companies also disclose the leadership indicators. So it is, popular, so to say. A lot of good companies, a lot of big companies are showing these kind of indicators as well. So going to the next part. Yes. So the first principle is on integrity. Businesses should conduct and govern themselves with integrity and in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. Now, this is a principle line that you see in italics here. The blue box that you see on the right hand side is no detective code. It stands for E stands for essential indicators, L stands for leadership indicators. So this principle has 7 essential indicators and 2 leadership indicators. The box that you see in green is actually essential indicators. The box in orange here is leadership indicators. So here, within the disclosures required, the companies were required to disclose on trainings and awareness campaigns done on integrity. What was the coverage? That is percentage of employees covered by designation, by female, and by whether they were permanent employees or not permanent employees. Any fines, penalties, or violation of the principles. It could be anything, or any compounding fees, any late fees, or prosecution that the company faced for violation of any acts or any relevant regulations which relate to those principles. Let's say the company violated any human right, then it would have to disclose that human right, which is part of, let's say, Principle 5, was violated because we violated the Human Rights Act, so and so. So those details are to be mentioned here. Then whether the company has an anti-corruption policy. If yes, have there been any cases where such of corruption within the structure of the corporate structure of the entity? Does the company have a policy for conflict of interest? If yes, have there been any cases of violation of relevant procedure? And within leadership indicators, it requires that companies disclose if any training and awareness sessions were taken for value chain partners. Now, what are value chain partners? The SEBI says that value chain partners includes upside and downside supply chain partners. So basically, it includes your distributors and vendors. It also includes your suppliers. It also includes your retailers, right? Training and awareness to them is something that companies nowadays track. In fact, a lot of companies have mandatory checks and even procurement policies, etc., where these are mandatory requirements that all those employees of the supplier, let's say, have to undergo this training before they work for us. Then the process to manage conflict of interest. The Companies Act also provides guidance to manage conflict of interest. Not allowed to vote or cannot, has to disclose that to the relevant person, etc. So all of that is also to be disclosed here. Principle 2 is on goods and services, which says that businesses should provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. So obviously, any company cannot say we are sustainable and or complying with ESG parameters if their goods and services itself are not sustainable and safe. So that is the very first step that the company has to follow. So here the kind of disclosures that are required are R&D and capex investments to improve environment and social impact. So basically, let's the company spends 100 rupees on R&D every year. Of that, how much percentage is actually for those projects which will improve the environment and social issues that the of the community at large, right? Similarly for capex investments. So that is to be disclosed here. Sustainable sourcing. So here the policy that the company uses for sustainable sourcing has to be mentioned. So website links can be issued. I have seen majority of the companies do have a sustainable policy. Here, the company is also required to disclose the percentage of suppliers covered under this policy. So I have seen a lot of companies where 100% compliance is met, but where the suppliers are very scattered or huge in number, then they look at, let's say, top 10 or top 20 suppliers and they disclose for them accordingly. Then processes employed to reclaim and reuse, recycle and dispose products. So process, the company is now not just responsible to sell. After selling the product is still alive till it is disposed of. So what is the company doing to reclaim those products, right? So more processes relating to recycling, reusing, the details regarding to that is what is sought here in BRSR. Then there is extended producer responsibility. So what is extended producer responsibility? It's basically a mechanism which says that producers, importers, and brands are now not just responsible to make the products, but also regarding their recycling, regarding their reuse, and their final disposal. So this is applicable majorly to plastic importers, producers, and other brands, but it is sort of extended to other electronic device manufacturing companies as well. So there are detailed regulations regarding it. You can look at the website also. The plastic regulation has specifically come through the Central Pollution Control Board, which makes it mandatory. So here the BRSR basically says that is IEPR actually applicable to you? If yes, provide a waste collection plan. So you can provide a link also that you may have submitted to the Central Pollution Control Board, or you may state the basic framework here. On the leadership indicators, life cycle assessment, basically a product goes through various stages during its life, right? From raw materials to processing to sale to after sales to final disposal. So during that life, what are the various, let's say, externalities it has on environment and social issues? So that is assessed by a lot of companies, maybe to reduce costs at some place, or sometimes to improve the design of the product, or to improve its lifespan, etc. So if the company has done any such assessment, it can disclose some points relating to that. Significant risks identified on production or disposal that can be disclosed here. Percentage reused or recycled, and this includes both input material and the end product. Percentage reclaimed, let's say 100 products were produced, of them, how many were reclaimed by the company? So that is something the company has to disclose. So that was about principle 2. Moving on to principle 3, that is based on employees. This is one of the most illustrious principle, which has 15 essential indicators and 6 leadership indicators. It says businesses should respect and promote the well-being of all employees, including those in their value chain. Now, we saw that the basic details of the employees were already taken in section B, that is the management indicators. Here, the disclosure is focusing on their well-being. So first one requires companies to disclose how many employees were given health and accident insurance, maternity, paternity benefits, and daycare facilities. So percentage is asked for separately for employees and for workers. What's the difference between employees and workers? Employees basically are salaried persons that the company has employed, and workers are generally daily wage laborers. So they have a contractual agreement with the company. Then disabled employees. So this is more relating to access to the premises. Are your premises accessible to disabled persons? Do you provide equal opportunities to disabled employees as provided in the Disabilities Act? So all of these things are to be disclosed by the company. Whether there's a grievance redressal mechanism, participation in unions. As per a lot of international frameworks also, it is mandatory for companies to allow participation in unions. In fact, it is very healthy for the welfare of the laborers in general, because they are very marginalized and vulnerable section. So the company cannot restrict the participation in unions. So companies are mandated to provide a percentage or the number of workers or employees that are part of such unions. Training and performance reviews, again, the structure is very focuses on how important learning and development is for the employees and the workers. So it provides an area where you can disclose how many employees are provided training for career development, how many were reviewed for their performance, how many received feedback, etc. Health and safety mechanism, one of the most important that most companies today follow. It requires disclosures on number of safety-related incidents that could have happened, fatalities, any high consequence work-related injuries. If any formal assessment was done of the companies or premises health and sorry, how prone it is to any injuries. So such kind of formal assessments are also done, health and safety assessments. And were there any negative comments, and what corrective actions the company has taken post that? So all of these disclosures are now required under BRSR. Some optional disclosures includes life insurance. Has the company given extended a life insurance policy to its employees? If yes, what is the percentage of employees covered here? Deduction of statutory dues and health systems by supply chain partners. Now, if you look at a lot of infrastructure companies, the majority of their workforce is actually indirect through their contractors. Now, if the contractors are exploiting the laborers, it is the company's reputation, and it is the company's. It is through the company that this is happening. So, what can the company do to actually prevent this? It has to conduct regular audits. A lot of companies do that, health and safety audits, they do vendor audits, they do vendor checks. In fact, a lot of companies even require physical proof of deduction of certain statutory dues by the contractor for their workers. So this is something that companies can disclose on a optional basis, because this is little heavy on compliance. That is why it is made voluntary right now. And any high consequence work related injuries that would have happened, the number has to be provided here, and what rehabilitation or relocation facilities were provided to such kind of employees. Moving to the fourth principle, that is stakeholders. Businesses should respect the interest of and be responsive to all its stakeholders. So we would have seen that few stakeholders have already been covered. Employees have already been covered. We shall cover consumers very shortly. But there are other stakeholders as well. So first, the company needs to identify who are those stakeholders. And second is, the company needs to communicate with those stakeholders, identify what are their problems, discuss their grievances, and then take corrective action. So the disclosures are on identification, communication, what is the channel, frequency, purpose. I'll just take one example here, which relates to TCS actually. A lot of companies have made this disclosure, but TCS actually did it quite well. So the box that you see here, actually, this is prescribed by the BRSR itself. It says what is a stakeholder group, whether it is vulnerable and marginalized group, what are the channels of communication, some examples are provided, frequency of engagement, annually, quarterly, half yearly, and what is the purpose of communication. So customers here have been classified as not vulnerable, not marginalized. A lot of companies I've seen have classified them as vulnerable and marginalized, because often they are very scattered and do not have a voice or power to say, or not much bargaining power there. So company, it differs from company to company. Channels of communication. So here it said as needed, project related calls, meetings, management reviews, relationship meetings, reviews, etc. Frequency. So for each communication, it was different. Some things were continuous, like social media, advertisements, etc. Half yearly, customer satisfaction surveys. Annually, there were some customer summits, innovation days, executive customer surveys, right? Then, what is the purpose? To understand client industry and business challenges, identifying opportunities, deciding on investments, etc. So, similarly, this was done for other stakeholder groups like investors, shareholders, employees, partners and collaborators, academic institutions, recruiters, industry bodies, and government. Now you can see like it's a lot of granular information that the company has gone ahead and presented. Even recruiters who just with whom they just maybe have a one-time interface, that is when they send in a requirement or during the empanelment process, but they have gone ahead and sort of provided the detail. So it differs from company to company how they choose to disclose such kind of things here. Some leadership indicators that are sort of voluntary here, feedback and consultation. So, of course, during communication, there's some feedback that the company would have received and some consultations that would have happened. So, the company can go ahead and disclose that here. Inputs from consultations in policies, specifically for improving any policies, and engagement with vulnerable and marginalized section. So, now you realize the importance of classifying any stakeholder as vulnerable. You might have to disclose what is it that you're doing to help or to protect the rights of these minority groups, right? So that's an additional disclosure. Going to principle 5, human rights. Businesses should respect and promote human rights. So disclosures, some of them are very standard. Training on human rights, which is a lot of times a lot of minority groups are not aware of what their rights are. So training has been made is sort of a essential task. So your companies have to disclose how many employees were covered in these trainings. Minimum wages equal or more. So as we all know, there are some regulations for minimum wages that the companies have to pay to their workers and employees. So is the company paying just that minimum, or are the or is the salary more than that? So that bifurcation is to be shown by the company. Then median salaries, and median salaries is to be shown for different classifications for both male and female, so that comparison across genders can be made. Across various designations, the BOD, KMP, employees, workers, etc. I'll just take another example here that's of TCS, a very interesting study. Many people would feel that such kind of information is not really available in the public, but these kind of disclosures are actually made in the BRSR. So this is the minimum wages paid to the employees. Basically, they've shown the percentage here. So very small percentage, like 0.2, 0.3% were paid minimum wages, especially for permanent employees. For non-permanent employees, a larger number was paid. Similarly, it is shown for the next previous year as well. Details of remuneration. This is the median salaries, like I told you, for different groups of people. Now, very interesting disclosure that the company made here is at TCS, remuneration is the same for men and women working full time in the same grade and in the same role. Then this is a very important point because we know that there are a lot of institutions, a lot of groups which are very active when it comes to gender equality. If you see that disclosure, you can see a gap in the median salary for men and women in middle and senior level employees, right? Now, the company has specifically addressed that. It has said that gaps in median salary between genders at middle and senior level is due to higher proportion of women at the junior level in each of these cohorts. So within each cohort also there are levels. So within those levels, the women were largely more on the junior side, and hence the median actually came to smaller number. So it's a great way for the company to demonstrate that it does uphold the rights for all genders, and it has sort of gone ahead and explained why, if there, in case there's any disparity, it sounds it provides a very it's actually a very good impression for the company to go ahead and disclose something like this. The next is Committee for Addressing Human Rights Issues on Grievance Redressal. So, I mean, whether such a company exists or not, that is something that needs to be disclosed. And what is the grievance redressal mechanism? Like how can how can employees come and complain, register their complaints with the management? Prevention of discrimination and harassment. So various things here actually. Companies are required to put cases of sexual harassment, discrimination at workplace, child labor, forced labor, and other human rights violations. This classification has to be provided by the company as to number of cases that were there for each of these. Human rights requirements in business contracts, obviously, especially this is so relevant for all manufacturing and infrastructure related companies because they hire so many contractors, and if there are human rights violations happening at that level, and I think a lot of international companies have also suffered from reputational loss because of this. Talk about Zara, talk about H&M. All of these companies were actually they came into the picture because a lot of members in their supply chain or their contractors were actually using child labor, or they were not following the best practices, or there were cases of forced labor. So all of this is very relevant to companies these days. Assessment of human rights. So whether any assessments were carried on, it's not mandatory. If they were carried out, then what were the corrective actions that were taken post that? In terms of leadership indicators, what were human right, whether human right due diligence was done, accessibility to disabled workers we had already covered previously, and assessment for value chain partners. So this was about principle 5. Principle 6 is about environment. This is again very illustrious, but largely very technical here. So disclosures relating to energy, water, liquid discharge, air emission, waste, biodiversity is required here. Relevant stats are required, which again you would need a technical person or generally an engineer to provide you the relevant details. An environment impact assessment is generally required by different laws, so that if it was applicable to you, then you are required to disclose relevant points here. In leadership indicators, some additional points that you could disclose is renewable, non-renewable energy. That classification could be shown. Water discharge, scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions, that is emissions arising from value chain partners. Impact on biodiversity in ecologically sensitive areas. Those are some of the areas that have been specifically designated by the government as sensitive. Innovative technology for resource efficiency, business continuity plan, adverse impacts on value chain, and percentage of value partners assessed. Now, I know it's a lot of information, but let's look at innovative technology, how Tech Mahindra has actually, Larsen and Turbo has sort of disclose this. Now, I mean, a lot of companies make boiler state comments that we have this technology, efficiency, improving technology, but what is the outcome? So, if you can see the screen, L&T actually went ahead and has disclosed the outcome of each of the initiative. Now, this is actually required by BRSR, but it has done it in a very beautiful manner. So let's say we'll just look at one, reduction in diesel consumption through operational improvements. What was the initiative? The details are provided. Plant and machinery and construction projects primarily use this diesel as a power source. The company has undertaken various operational improvements like increasing utilization, reducing idle time, etc. This has caused reduction of 7,547 trillion CO2 equivalent emissions on account of optimization. So this is the level of detail the company has shown. This is just for the innovative technologies that it has used in its operations. So this was a great example of how companies have gone ahead and sort of taken these environmental points into their policies, into their strategies. Next, principle 7 is policy advocacy. Businesses, when engaging in influencing public and regulatory policies, should do in a manner that is responsible and transparent. So we know that companies largely lobby for reforms. They are also called upon to provide their recommendations when, let's say, India as a country is making its own foreign policy or introducing any reform, right? So disclosures are required for top 10 affiliations generally. Anti-competitive conduct by the entity, have there been any such cases that have been registered against the company, they have to be disclosed. And in leadership indicators, public policy positions that the company has advocated. Now, I actually checked this particular point in a lot of annual reports. Companies have just provided very general disclosures everywhere. There's this one company, TCS, that has disclosed it really well. I'll just give you a quick view of that. Yes. So it has disclosed the policy advocated first. These granular details I couldn't see in a lot of companies. So the SEZ reform, FTA reform, promoting trade and goods in goods and services, data regulation policy, and other engagements like telecom, 5G, digital, etc. There it has provided what was the method, like which ministry did it speak to, or how was it done? Like, was it done through an association? Whether information is available in public, it's generally very broad level information, not very detailed, but yes, that's already put on its website here. So the link is also here. And what is the frequency as and when required? So I think this was a great mechanism for the company to demonstrate that it really cares about what policies the government is following and sort of actively makes contributions to it. It's a great way to sort of participate in public policy decisions. Coming to principle 8, that is on inclusive growth. Businesses should promote inclusive growth and equitable development. This is largely on having equality and growing together. So what are the kind of disclosures? Social impact analysis, what does that mean? So basically, a lot of companies are required to do environmental impact assessments as per compliance laws relating to state development and public works organization, then the Environment Protection Act. So there, and SIA, that is a social impact assessment, is also mandatory. So what things are addressed there? Community and stakeholder engagement, housing and welfare for workforce, local business and industry promotion, community well-being and health. All of these issues are addressed there. So if any assessment has been conducted, the details have to be provided here. Then projects with ongoing rehabilitation, resettlement, grievance redressal, and what percentage is sourced from MSMEs, what percentage is sourced from neighboring districts. So this is to ensure that there is inclusive growth all around. On leadership indicators, mitigation of negative impacts that were there in any assessment that was conducted. CSR projects in aspirational districts. These are certain districts that the government has identified as important. So those are covered here. Preferential procurement policy, I think we already saw that. Here, just that certain neighboring districts could be given more importance. Disabled people could be given more importance. Whether such policy is there or not, that has to be disclosed. Benefits from intellectual properties owned or acquired based on traditional knowledge. These are certain IPs which run through tradition. That is, they're passed from generation to generation. So some benefit is not, or a lot of times shared with those communities. So do you have any such intellectual properties where you share the benefits with any communities, that has to be disclosed here. And beneficiaries of CSR projects, who are they and what are the communities they belong to. Finally, coming to the last principle, that is consumers. Businesses should engage with and provide value to their consumers in a responsible manner. So this is, I think, the most easy to understand: consumer complaints, consumer redressal, product information, product recall, handling data privacy, corrective actions. Every company would do that because it's a source of business for them. Additionally, what were the campaigns for customer education, satisfaction surveys, and instances of data breaches? You would realize that BRSR is very, very comprehensive. In fact, I just checked Facebook's sustainability report and I could not find a single word on data privacy. So just imagine how holistic BRSR is when we look at ESG parameters and the disclosures required here. So just to conclude, what is that we really learn from BRSR? Some disclosures are required. Of course, disclosures are required, but does not make all processes mandatory. Like we saw that companies require to have policies for the 9 principles. It is not mandatory. But if you do not disclose or you do not have a policy, you need to provide reasons. So it creates a moral obligation, or it sort of brings it much to the light that, okay, if we do not disclose a policy, we need to disclose a reason. So might not be really good for a company to just put any reason there. Second is, it's very subjective. Different disclosures can be made differently by different companies. Like there was one disclosure where value chain partners were required to be assessed for environmental impact. Now, this is not required by law right now, but every company can have its own policy. So what are the impacts that a company can actually assess could be different for different companies. So there is that level of subjectivity that is still there in a lot of disclosures. A lot of disclosures are part voluntary. So of course, all the leadership indicators as such are voluntary, but within non-voluntary indicators also, that is the essential indicators, some companies elect to show some disclosures and they skip on the others. So the first example where I told you that a lot of good things are disclosed, bad things are not disclosed, that is still a possibility because somewhere companies are given that option, right? Similarly, the example I took here was life cycle assessments. Some companies may show if they have undertaken. Some companies may say reject to show. Some companies have shown it for few products. In fact, I saw a few examples there, and those have not shown for few products. It requires companies to report statistics. This is something that is a great benefit because previously companies just made statements, but now you need to show progress against it. Remember the Tech Mahindra example, or it had to show progress in terms of numbers. A lot of percentages were asked as a percentage of revenue, as a percentage of the total employees, etc. So you could actually make an analysis, okay, if significant work has been done or not. Comparability, the framework is same, so you can compare across industries, even across peers, because you're also showing progress year by year. So you can compare that amongst peers as well. And cross-referencing, this is a very flexible point. Let's say company elects to follow multiple frameworks. Like Ultratech, we saw was following GRI, was following TCFD, IR framework. So it had to integrate all of that while also reporting for BRSR. So there would be a lot of duplication, right? But you can give references to other areas in the same annual report, and sort of that makes work easier for you. So this is what BRSR is about in a gist. There is a lot of detail that can go into it. There is a lot more that can be said actually, but the time is up, so I would like to stop here. In case you all have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And I think Bhavin, over to you if you want to take forward from your.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
There is one question from Siddharth Shankar Roy. Auditing an organization as per this framework.
So there's actually a requirement. I have a slide on it. I didn't take it off here. Reasonable assurance and limited assurance. So limited assurance is actually required for value chain partners and reasonable assurance for BRSR. Reasonable assurance, as we know, is the normal assurance that we do. That is whether the statements present a true and fair view. There are a lot of standards applicable. ICI itself has a standard on sustainable reporting assurance. There are a lot of international standards, A3000, etc., that are available. ISAE 3000, all these are available. Depending on whether it's a reasonable assurance, limited assurance, you can take up those standards.
Okay. There is one more question from Neha. Can I get recording of this session? So
I'm not sure.
okay, no more question.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, C.A. Bhavin Dedia, one of the coordinator for today's webinar. It is a privilege to address such a distinguished audience, and I want to express my gratitude for your presence here. Would like to thank CA Disha Vira for sharing a valuable knowledge about business responsibility and sustainability report. She also helps to understand why business responsibility and sustainability report are required, whom to require, what to report, and disclosure are required, which helps to all the stakeholders. BRSR will help us to understand, to know the organization's goal, responsibility towards shareholders, towards employees, towards government, and towards environment, etc. Uh, Disha will also help to show some of the reports of the TCS, LNT, and to make the clarity to understand how BRSR reports are going. I would like to thank CA Disha Vira on behalf of ICI and Women and Young Members Excellence Committee to share this valuable knowledge about BRSR. Thank you.
Thanks, Bhavin. Thanks for the kind words.
Okay. Now it's time for our second session of today's webinar. The topic is key recent ruling in transfer pricing, and we have very young and dynamic speaker, CA Shajia Khatri. It is privilege to introduce CA Shajia Khatri. CA Shajia Khatri has over 11 years of post-qualification experience and has specialized in transfer pricing. CS Azia has worked on a wide variety of assignments and has assisted several multinational on planning their transfer pricing strategies, in preparing documentation, and represented them in course of their transfer pricing audits, appellate proceeding, and APA discussion. Sazia has serviced clients across various industries, including IT, ITES, financial services, shipping, logistics, etc. Now, CA Sajia Khatri will take the second session. Over to you, CA Sajia Khatri. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavan. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. Good evening, all. Yes. Good evening, all. So today I'll be covering the topic of recent ruling and transfer pricing. Now, before we get into discussing the specific ruling, I would just like to set the stage with giving a bird's eye view on what the litigation scenario has been of transfer pricing in India. So, transfer pricing has been introduced by Finance Act 2001, and right from AY 2002 2003 being the first year when transfer pricing provisions were applicable or were introduced in the Income Tax Act. This section has been a subject matter of litigation. And this litigation is not something which is concluded very quickly. It is seen that the transfer pricing litigations have stretched a lot, right from the officers being very aggressive at the initial stage. We have a specific wing, transfer pricing officers who look at such cases, and they are very focused on this area. So there is an aggressiveness which is seen on the lower field itself. Also, the tribunals have taken or are very have taken a very not very lenient view. They are going into the details and all the other aspects in respect of these transfer pricing matters. Now, while this is only one section in the Income Tax Act, when you look at the transfer pricing, it's only section 92 that ones deal with when you practice a transfer pricing or when you are dealing with a transfer pricing assessment or a case. But the kind of litigation that this one section has is tremendous, right from what is an associated enterprise, uh, is the transaction an international transaction, what kind of method is the most appropriate method for a particular transaction, what are the filters that need to be selected, what kind of comparables do you select, is Infosys comparable, is eClerx comparable, what kind of adjustments do you make to compare your net profit margin comparable to the comparable company's margin. So any area that you look at in transfer pricing has been a subject matter of litigation. And in fact, India is one of the top most country with the transfer pricing litigation in the world. So overall worldwide, if we see, India accounts for the top 5 litigate countries where transfer pricing is one of the key areas. And this battle has not only rested at the tribunal level. So recently we had a Supreme Court ruling in case of SAP Labs, where the discussion was, let me just take a step back. So when the tribunal decides, so most of these transfer pricing litigation at that point of time, around 4 5 years back, used to be on the comparable companies, whether a company is comparable to us or not. And tribunals have given their findings on those companies as comparable. Such kind of a cases traveled to High Court. So department went into the High Court, and Karnataka High Court in case of Soft Brand, they said that the selection of companies as comparable is more of a question of fact and not a question of law. As we know that High Courts and Supreme Courts are only there in the Income Tax Act. Their jurisdiction is only to deal with question of law. So in such a case, such kind of litigants or such kind of grounds cannot come up before the High Court, and High Court dismissed a bunch of appeals, saying that such kind of questions are not question of law, but these are question of fact. Tribunal being the last fact finding authority, the matter should end over there. Supreme Court Revenue did appeal before the Supreme Court, and recently Supreme Court in the decision of SAP Lab, they disposed of a bunch of 90 appeals, remanding it back to the High Court to say no, even the selection of companies as comparable is a question of law, because you need to see whether in the spirit of the law such a company could be taken as a comparable or not. So imagine 90 cases which were concluded at the tribunal level, dismissed at the High Court level, now again are back to the High Court level to see whether a company is comparable or not. So that is a kind of a litigation scenario in the space. And while there are a lot of areas under litigation, today what we are going to cover, or what I'm going to cover, are 4 rulings, recent rulings, more on the legal principle. So while there are a bunch of appeals which are still pending or piling up in the area of transfer pricing, but recent rulings where the assessment orders or the transfer pricing orders have been quashed because of some or the other legal principle. And today, the cases that we are going to discuss will be revolving around three key sections. Section 153 on limitation, 144C on DRP provisions, and 92CA being the transfer pricing assessment provision. So let me continue with one first recent ruling that we are going to discuss today. It's a case of Teleperformance Global Services Private Limited, where the final assessment order has been quashed because the transfer pricing order became barred by limitation. Now, it's an interesting one that when a transfer pricing order is barred by limitation, how can the assessment order be quashed? Let's look at what are the facts and how did the ruling evolve. So in this case, the TPO passed an assessment or TPO passed the transfer pricing order on 1st November 2019, where he proposed certain adjustments on the arm's length pricing. The adjustment were in respect of provision of IT-enabled services, something on the interest on loan or the guarantee. Those kind of adjustments were there, amounting to around 60 crore of adjustment was made by the transfer pricing officer in this order, which he passed on 1st November 2019. Now, as we know that once a transfer pricing order is passed, making any adverse adjustment, the assessing officer has to issue a draft assessment order. So that assessing officer in this case, he passed a draft assessment order on 27 December 2019, where he incorporated the TP adjustment, the 60 crore odd amount, whatever the TPO has proposed, he incorporated that in the draft assessment order. Plus, he made certain other disallowances in the nature of depreciation on certain intangible asset or your 14A disallowances. Those other than transfer pricing disallowances totaled up to around 90 crores. So in all, we are looking at addition of 150 crore in this case. Once the draft assessment order was passed, the assessee preferred an appeal before the DRP. And DRP, they issued their direction on 20th March 2021. Once the DRP directions are issued, the AO has to then incorporate those DRP directions in the order and pass the final assessment order, which in this case was passed on 17th April 2021. Now, the assessee in this case contended that the TPO order, which is passed on 1st November 2019, is delayed by 1 day. He had to pass an order by 31st October 2019, but he has issued an order on 1st November 2019, and therefore the TP order is barred by limitation. It's beyond the time limit which is prescribed under the Act. Once the TPO order is barred by limitation, there is no TP adjustment which sustains. So it's like the TP order has never been passed. And therefore, once TP order is barred by limitation, all subsequent proceeding which has happened, issue of draft assessment order, DRP proceeding, or issuance of final assessment order is also void of initio. Now let's see what the tribunal took note of. Now, where does the timeline for the transfer pricing officer to pass the assessment on the transfer pricing order arises? It comes from section 92 CA 3, which says that the TPO has to pass an order any time before 60 days prior to the date on which the period of limitation under section 153 for making in the order of assessment expires. So, three key important wordings over here. Anytime before 60 days prior to the date on which the limitation under section 153 expires. So now we go back to section 153, which says that no assessment order can be passed after 21 months from the end of the assessment year. Now, this was an assessment year AY 1670. So, 21 months, no order can be passed. And in case it is a TP reference, you get an additional 12 months. So, in this case, the time limit under section 153 was to expire on 31st December 2019. Now, the section says prior to the date on which the period of limitation under section 153 expires. So, in our case, AY 1617, the limitation of 153 will expire on 31st December 2019. Prior to that would be 30th December. So, I have to obviously exclude 31st December to compute 60 days because it says prior, 60 days prior. So, 31st December gets excluded. Then we count 60 days backwards from that day. So 30 days of December, 30 days of November, and it has to be passed. So before 1st November 2019, the TPO should have passed its order. So the last date for the TPO to pass the order is 31st October 2019. In this case, the TPO order was dated 1st November 2019 and therefore it is beyond the time limit prescribed under the Act and therefore liable to be quashed. This principle of the TPO order, once the TPO order is beyond limitation, it needs to be quashed, has been upheld by various judicial rulings, including high courts, one of the leading case being Pfizer Healthcare India Private Limited, which is a Madras High Court decision. Now, once the TPO order is held to be barred by limitation, there's no TP adjustment which sustains. So the department argued, okay, there's no TP adjustment which sustain, but then let's adjudicate the other 90 crore adjustment which the assessing officer has made, which is outside the TP provision. In addition, the non-TP adjustments which have made. The tribunal for that noted that once the TP order is barred by limitation, there's no TP adjustment which sustain. It's as good as no TP order being passed. Once there is no adverse adjustment or adverse variance under section 92 CA, the assessee is not an eligible assessee. So under section 144C, once that 144C says or it applies or it gives you an alternate dispute resolution mechanism, which is a faster route to the tribunal in a form of a dispute resolution panel, where if you are an assessee who has faced an adverse transfer pricing adjustment or you are a non-resident assessee, you can avail this alternative route of dispute resolution panel. Now, once there is no adverse TP adjustment under section 92 CA, you are no longer an eligible assessee. And when you are no longer an eligible assessee, there cannot be a draft assessment order under section 144C. The draft assessment order only arises when you are an eligible assessee facing a TP adjustment. In this case, there is no TP adjustment because the TP order is barred by limitation and therefore you are not an eligible assessee. The moment you are not an eligible assessee, the draft assessment order which was passed by the assessing officer loses its validity, loses its very foundation. It's a void ab initio or a legally invalid order. So the moment TP order is time barred, your draft assessment order becomes legally invalid and any proceeding which arises from a legally invalid order is also invalid. So just by delaying or just because the TP order was delayed by one day, the tribunal quashed the TP order, quashed the draft assessment order and consequently the final assessment order. So the income which the assessee has offered in its return of income reinstated. Entire adjustment has been deleted. Now it's an interesting case. We need to see how the department is going to take it forward. We understand that this case has been approached or is being litigated at the High Court level. As of today, in terms of judicial precedent, we have the High Court rulings which are holding that any TPO order which is delayed even by 1 day is barred by limitation. But we need to see how this ruling, which tribunal has extended even to the draft assessment order, is seen from the High Court perspective. The next ruling that we are going to take is in terms of or one the talk of the town, which is the rulings in case of shelf drilling and roka bathroom, where it has been held that the time limits or your section 153 and section 144C are mutually inclusive. Now, what does that mean? Let's understand as to what were the facts in this case and what has been the ruling. So this is a ruling, or this is a case of shelf drilling. The ruling pronounced by Bombay High Court. There were a lot of assessees, so self-drilling group entities. They filed a series of writ petitions before the High Court, primarily pertaining to assessment year 2014-15 and assessment year 18-19. Let's first take up AY 1415 because that is a lead case which is discussed by the High Court in pronouncing its decision and then replicated in all the other cases. Now, shelf drilling, it's a non-resident entity engaged in operating the rigs. They have over the period they have been availing the preemptive taxation regime prescribed under the Income Tax Act under Section 144BB, where they have an option to offer their income at 10% of the gross receipt. Now, in assessment year 14-15, they didn't opt for a preemptive taxation regime and they maintained a proper books of account, claiming a loss of around 120 crore as a in their return of income as a carry forward for next year. So there was a loss of 120 crore which was reported by the assessee. It got picked up for assessment. The assessing officer, he denied the loss and he went back and said that you have to tax your income under the presumptive taxation regime, and he taxed it at 10% of the gross receipt. The matter traveled from DRP to the tribunal. The tribunal, in the original proceeding, they remanded the matter back to the assessing officer to say that the assessing officer has not really looked at the books of account that the assessee has maintained, and it has simply gone on to tax it under the presumptive taxation regime. So they remanded it back to the assessing officer. Now the tribunal order, which is dated 4th October 2019. Now it's a key date. Tribunal remanded it back to the assessing officer on 4th October 2019. The assessee approached the assessing officer to give effect to the tribunal order or to carry out the remand proceedings pursuant to the tribunal order under section 254. And the assessing officer really issued the first notice post the tribunal order sometime in August 2021. So you can really see that right from October 2019 till August 2021, there was no movement from the assessing officer's side. And once he issued the notice, he passed a draft assessment order because assessee is a non-resident. He passed a draft assessment order on 28 September 2021. Now, assessee, while on this draft assessment order basis, he approached the DRP. He also simultaneously filed a writ petition before the High Court because they said that under section 153, which is the timeline which there's a timeline when the remand proceeding needs to be completed. So it says 12 months from the end of the financial year in which the tribunal order is received by the office or the income tax department. Now, this order of 28 September 2021 is far beyond the limitation, prescribed under Section 153. Even if the extension which was given by the TOLA Act are considered, then the assessing officer has to complete the assessment proceeding before 30th September 2021, because that is what it says. The TOLA Act had said that the assessment order under Section 153, the time limit or the extended time limit is 30th September 2021. Now, when the assessing officer has passed the draft assessment order itself on 28th September 21, how can the DRP proceeding and the final assessment order be completed in just 2 days? So it's impossible for now the assessing officer to pass a final assessment order, and therefore this order is again barred by limitation. Now, High Court, they heard the assessee, they heard the department, and the department's primary contention, while assessee contended that this is beyond the limitation period which is prescribed under Section 153, the department really contended that Section 144C, it has a non-obstere clause which says that notwithstanding anything contained in Section 153. So 144C timelines are over and above what timelines have been prescribed under Section 153. And they said that in view of that, the order dated 20th September 21, being a draft assessment order, is within the limitation. And there is no real timeline which is prescribed under the Act in case of a remand proceeding where 144C comes operational. The High Court said that that argument of the department is not appealing, because under the Act, the timelines have been prescribed for each and every stage of the assessment proceeding, right from filing a return of income by the assessee until the completion of the assessment, and all the other procedure have a proper timeline. Wherever the legislator intended to provide an extended timeline, like in case of transfer pricing assessment, additional 12 months have been granted. Or let's say when the matter is, when an application is made to a settlement commission, or when an application is being made to AR, or if there is any reference for exchange of information, then the Act itself says that such kind of period needs to be excluded. So wherever the legislator intended to provide additional time, it has specifically provided so in the relevant provisions, in the relevant section. But when we read Section 153, there is no mention of 144C. So the legislation never intended to exclude the time which is given under 144C for the DRP to complete this proceeding, or to say that 144C becomes operational after 153 timelines are completed, or it is over and above 153 timeline. So they have held that since there is no such provisions in the Act, it cannot be said that 144C is over and above 153. So they have said that 153 is the outer time. All your proceedings, including passing of draft assessment order, DRP proceeding, passing of DRP direction, passing of final assessment order, needs to be completed within the outer time limit, which is prescribed under Section 153. Also, if the argument of the department is accepted, then in such cases there is no timeline under the Act. So the assessing officer will be at his uh, own own fancies and at his own will. Whenever he can carry out the assessment for the cases which are subject matter of 144C, or which have where the assessees have an option to go before the DRP, which cannot be the intent, because you can't have the remand proceedings, one being time specific in cases which are not the eligible assessee, and where the assessees are considered eligible assessee under 144C, there is no time limit for the remand proceeding to get concluded. So considering all these scenarios, all these facts, the tribunal ruled that in a remand proceeding, 153 timelines needs to be specifically followed. In this case, since the draft assessment order itself was issued on 28th September 21, and in no occasion the final assessment order was passed by 30th September 21, the assessment is liable to be quashed. and they quashed the assessment order, restoring the return of income which was filed by the assessee. Now, this is in the context of the remand proceeding. While dealing with, so they also had one year where assessment year 18-19 was involved. Now, this is not a case of a remand proceeding, but it is a fresh assessment. And here they said that, I will just read what exactly they had mentioned. And they said, here also the same major ground of challenge arises. That is, the final assessment order has to be passed within the period of limitation set out in section 153 of the Act, even if the provision of section 144C of the Act are applicable. The only difference in these two petitions is that in these cases, it was the original assessment order which was required to be passed within the period of limitation set out under section 153. So they have clearly said that there is no difference between a case of a remand proceeding or an original assessment proceeding. And even in case of an original assessment proceeding, the entire exercise has to be completed within the outer time limit of section 153. Now, this is a very bold or a very important ruling, because in a practical world, right since AYS 78, when the DRP provisions were introduced, the understanding at the field officer as well as among the assessees have been that the draft assessment order needs to be filed by the date which is given under section 153, and thereafter your 144C recourse takeover. Now, if the interpretation which the High Court has upheld is to be viewed, then all the transfer pricing proceeding or assessments which have been concluded so far, right from AY 78 would become time barred, or any assessment which has traveled through the DRP route would become barred by limitation. All the appeals which are pending before the tribunal, CIT appeal, or before the High Court would be quashed within 1 second. So it's and this could never be an intent, because AY 78, right, after 13-14 years we are realizing, oh, what we were doing right since 10 more than 10 years is something which is not correct. So we need to see how the Supreme Court takes a view on this matter. Certainly department has filed an appeal before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has stayed the operation of these two rulings. Shelf drilling, which is a Bombay High Court ruling, and also there's a Madras High Court ruling in case of Roka Bathroom. Roka Bathroom was the first case endorsing this view, which was followed by Bombay High Court. Both this, the Bombay High Court ruling has been stayed by Supreme Court to say that this should not be considered as a precedent, and this ruling would only be applicable to the assessee on which it has been pronounced. So now really we need to see how the Supreme Court takes a view. For now, the assessees are taking this as a ground before the tribunal or wherever their appeals are pending, because it's a very legal ground, can be taken up. And why not, if your entire assessment order is getting quashed because of this provision? But what I understand right now, the tribunals are not really taking up this legal ground until there is some view from the Supreme Court, because it's a very, very, very bold view. And all the appeals where such grounds are taken is right now on hold or are being adjourned for some time. The next case that we are going to look at, again, these two cases, they are dealing with section 144C. Now, section 144C is a separate section in itself. It's prescribed the provisions for approaching a dispute resolution panel, and there are two key relevant subsections in 144C. One which says that section 144C13, which says that the final assessment order, once the DRP directions are received, the final assessment order needs to be passed in conformity with the DRP directions within 1 month from the end of the month in which the DRP directions are received. So, two important criteria over here. One is that your final assessment order has to be in conformity with the directions which are given by the DRP. And secondly, there's a specific time limit which is given under section 144C13, which is 1 month from the end of the month in which the directions are received by the assessing officer. Now, there are cases where, let's say, the DRP gave a certain direction, but the assessing officer, for whatever reason, maybe due to oversight, or maybe he could not understand, or he could not give effect to those directions due to some practical reason, whatever be it, he did not incorporate those directions in the final assessment order. The assessees have argued that in such case, the final assessment order is void or a bad order. What has been the tribunals or the High Court take on that? They have accepted the contentions of the assessee because they have said that 144C is a mandatory provision. Being a separate code, it has to be strictly followed. And when section 144C13 specifically states that the assessment order has to be in conformity with the direction, there is no room which is open to the assessing officer to ignore any of the directions. So let's say if there are a couple of directions, there are 4 grounds. The assessing officers follow three directions and comply with that, but fourth he ignores it, or he says that the DRP upholds what the TPO has done, or what the assessing officer or what the assessing officer's office has done, and he ignores that direction. Then in such case, the assessment order becomes bad in law because it is not in conformity with the directions which are issued by the DRP. And this principle has been upheld by various tribunals and recently by Karnataka High Court. This is the first High Court upholding this principle, which is in the case of Flextronic Technologies India Private Limited, Karnataka High Court decision, where the specific question of law before them was whether the ITAT is right in holding that the final assessment order as bad on the ground that AO has not passed order as per the DRP direction, and they have held it in favor of the assessee and quashed the final assessment order. The another aspect is that what if the assessment order is in conformity with the direction, but it is passed beyond 1 month. So as per 144C13, the time limit is 1 month from the end of the month in which such directions are received by the assessing officer's office. So let's say the DRP passed its direction in May 23, which was received by the assessing officer in the same month. So ideally, the time limit which is available for the assessing officer to pass an assessment order is 30th June 23. But let's say for some reason assessing officer passes the order on 15 July 23 or maybe 31st July 23. In that case, the final assessment order becomes barred by limitation because it is beyond the period which is prescribed under section 144C13. And this principle has been upheld in a recent. There are numerous judicial proceedings, but recently, Mumbai Tribunal in case of APM Terminal Private Limited had again endorsed this view. They have specifically noted that in this current regime of e-assessment where the directions or order are uploaded under the ITBA, how do you really make out whether a case where the directions have been received by the assessing officer or not? Where they have, in a one statement, they have noted that once the DRP uploads the directions in the ITBA, it can be said that these are received by the assessing officer because ITBA system is a transparent system operating on a real-time basis. So having said that, they have quashed the final assessment order. So without really getting into the merits of the adjustment, which could be very litigative, very subjective, these are certain legal principles where the tribunals have taken a view and quashed the final assessment order. I thought it would be important that we discuss these rulings today so as to give you a thought on the plate and maybe explore if any such kind of a ground could be taken in case of your clients or your assessments. With this, I conclude and I hand over to Bhavin or Jessica for taking it forward, or if there are any questions, I'm happy to address.
Uh, Thank you, Shazia ma'am, for such an informative session. It gave us a lot of insight on how, the entire transfer pricing rulings and how to go about it, such issues in future. So really, I would like to express my gratitude towards you for taking time out to explain us in such detail and with so much clarity. So on behalf of all the attendees and the coordinators and the entire team of WIRC, I would like to thank you for such a nice session. Now I'll just take up the questions. One second. Okay. Okay. Ma'am, we do not have any questions from anyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank-
so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.